This is the cheapest force feedback yoke I know of, the MOZA AY90. $399 US, but MOZA have cut a few things to land on this price. Most of the things they've cut are expected, and one of them I'd say only matters depending on what yoke you're flying with right now. So the question for this video is simple. What did they cut? Does any of it actually matter? And how good is the MOZA AY90 for the price? MOZA sent the AY90 for testing and review. They haven't seen this video before you have, and they have no input and no creative control. So force feedback in a yoke, what is it? Well, at a basic level, you feel airflow over your control surfaces, so your elevator and your ailerons. As your airspeed builds, the yoke stiffens up in your hands, slow down, and it goes soft and sloppy on you the same way it does in a real airplane. On top of that, you've got turbulence, engine vibration, and a whole heap of other effects, and these you can dial in yourself. And that's the whole pitch here. The airplane talks to you through your hands, and it makes a fairly big difference in the sim. Just that feeling of flying something that's alive. Now, this yoke is effect heavy, so I'm not going to go through everything because you can read through that in the specs on the website, but I do want to single out a few favorites and important effects. So one, which we've already covered, is force versus airspeed effect, which is good but not great considering the entire landscape of force feedback yokes. I think the kings of this effect still seem to be Brunner, but MOZA does deliver to a very acceptable level with this effect. The second one is trim effects and trimming out against pressure and yoke movement. And this is super helpful in the sim. If there's one reason to get a force feedback yoke, it might be the trim effect. The third one, and it's particular to this yoke, is the deceleration effect when changing power. It's this very subtle inertia effect. I'll try and demo it on camera. Now, whether this is realistic or not, I'm not sure. Real world pilots jump in here, but I do like the feeling of it. And the fourth one is stall and buffet effects. And the fifth, engine vibration. And like force versus airspeed, the engine vibration is good, but it's not the best when you take into consideration the complete or the entire category of force feedback yokes. But also we got to consider the price, because for the price, all of these effects are great. So the effects are covered, at least the ones that I want to highlight. The question is whether $400 buys you enough of that alive feeling. And before we get too far into the video, there's an important point I need to make, and it's relevant to the price here. The AY90 is a base only and does not come with a yoke handle. For a yoke handle, you've got two choices: the standard MOZA yoke handle or the Pro. And you're buying one of those additional to the yoke, or in some package deal if they have one on launch. So the actual price of $399 is more like $530 US. Now, in my hands in this video, we are using the Pro yoke handle. This is also the new MOZA product, and there will be a review of this coming out soon. That in mind, every price I've quoted in this video is the standard yoke handle, because that's the cheapest entry point. So hold $530 in your head, because it comes back at the end of the video when we look at what else is out there, and that's where things get super interesting. Okay, the most obvious thing, or the thing people like to talk about, the power and the torque. On this yoke, we have 4.2 Newton meters of peak torque on the roll axis and 90 Newtons of push and pull force. For context, the AY210, the bigger brother of this, is 9 Newton meters of roll and 210 Newtons of push-pull. So this is less than half the power. But flip it around and the Brunner CLSE-NG is 1.7 Newton meters of roll and 40 Newtons of push. From that angle, the AY90 has more than double the power. So which is it? Is it weak or is it strong? Here's what I think the key takeaway is, and it applies to every force feedback product you'll ever look at. We don't know exactly how these manufacturers are measuring these forces. So when you're lining up a number from MOZA against a number from Brunner, against a number from flightsim.com, it's hard to compare like for like. You're really comparing three different marketing departments. Now, I've flown all of them apart from flightsim.com's products, and they all feel like they have enough power. But when you're talking about these higher powered Yokes, what actually separates them isn't the peak power, it's the fidelity of the effects and how much room the Yoke has got to work within its effect range, and the software, of course. So the AY90 has enough power. I've not once been flying it and thought it needed more. And that was a surprise after being so used to flying the high-end Brunner for such a long time. But there's something they cut out that you might feel. And this is the one I want your opinion on. They cut the pitch travel down to 95 millimeters. In real life, most GA aircraft sit somewhere around 140 to 170 millimeters of elevator travel or throw. The AY210 sits around 160, so we're down roughly 40% to a 95 millimeter. Now, is that a deal breaker? I think it depends entirely on what you're flying right now. If you're coming from a honeycomb, it's more or less the same travel. You won't notice a thing. And if you're coming from nothing at all, you'll never know what you're missing. But if you've flown something with 160 mil, and I have, you will notice it. More travel means finer control, and you can genuinely be more precise with it. But after a few hours and a few landings under your belt, you do adapt. It stops being a thing you think about. However, it's still something you should factor in to your decision. Now, this is one I'd love to get your take on. If you've gone down from a long throw Yoke down to a short one, did you adapt or did it bug you? Chime in, because I reckon this is the single thing that decides whether you're looking at an AY90 or an AY210. Now, the shorter throw does bring an upside: desk space. At 315 by 210 millimeters, it's way smaller than the AY210. If you're on a desk rather than a full rig, that's not a compromise, it's more of a feature. So now that we got that out of the way, what does the build quality look like when you're paying $400? Gone is the metal shell of the AY210. This is a full plastic housing. Good plastic, but plastic. The bit that surprised me a little is the mounting points on the ends are also plastic. If you pick one of these up, don't over tighten the mounting points if you're screwing it down. That's a genuine warning, not a nitpick. I do fear these could crack, but the Yoke does come with a set of mounting clamps which work well. These right here. The Yoke rod itself is thick steel. Really solid, absolutely no complaints there. The same acrylic panel across the front as the AY210, and MOZA's backlighting across this is still the best in the game. It's crisp, even, and has a stunning finish. The Yoke is also just as quiet in operation as the AY210. I was expecting the cheaper unit to be noisier. It isn't. You get your master battery and avionics, your magnetos, but the magnetos does not have a spring return, which is a bit of a shame. Then there's two large axes on the front. Now, I like these and I don't at the same time. On the left, a massive linear flaps lever or slider with no detents. I don't understand this one. The AY210 has a flaps toggle, which for me is way more functional. Here you get a slider, and next to it is a throttle axis. Both axes or levers are different shapes, which is smart when considering VR users. Honestly though, I think most people will rebind both to something more useful. But they're there and they will be good for a variety of different things. Now let's move on to the build quality. Now for the price, it's kind of what you'd expect in terms of build quality when we're talking about the casing and the mounting. And they've kept that high quality solid yoke rod like we spoke about, and that's really nice to see. I think you'll take this out of the box and you'll feel like you got what you paid for. The software's where MOZA have quietly done the most work since I last reviewed the AY210. MOZA cockpit has matured really well. We're past the point where I needed to warn you about missing features. If anything, it's swung the other way. There's almost too much in there now. It can feel overwhelming next to something like Brunner's SimUX, but it's stable, it works, and it's deeply configurable. Just be prepared to spend time in here and tinker your way around and get your head around the profiles and all the different effects that can be applied. There's a lot in here and it's easy to overdo things and get confused, which can create you could say a muddy force feedback feeling. But once you get your head around the software, it's mostly plug and play. But obviously it needs mains power and it needs the software to be running. If you're coming from a honeycomb that just plugs in and goes, that's a change on how you start a session. And whether you like it or not, it's adding complexity to the sim. Now remember that 530 USD. Here is what else is out there in that sort of lower power range. We have the Brunner CLSE-NG at 1,547 US dollars. Then the FlightSim.com CLS60 at 899. And then the MOZA with a handle about 530. I think this is MOZA's mic drop moment. MOZA have come in the cheapest by a long way and it's not close. So the real question isn't AY90 versus Brunner or FlightSim.com because I think these are already outpriced. The question is AY90 versus AY210. Do you stretch? For me, I probably would if you have the budget. Not for the power though. The AY90 has enough power to get by. I'd stretch for the pitch travel, but please remember I'm coming at this having used a 160mm elevator axis for a long time. But, and this is the bit that matters, if you're coming from a honeycomb or you're new to force feedback or your desk is small, take pitch travel out of the equation and the AY90 is a no-brainer in terms of value. And MOZA yet again put pressure and competition into the force feedback market. Now let's rip through the pros and the cons. Pros first, the price. MOZA keep driving the cost of flight sim gear down and I love to see it. It has enough power for a good experience, the same software and the same features as their high-end yoke. Solid steel yoke rod, the best backlighting in the business. This one has got a smaller footprint and once configured it's relatively plug and play and it's just as quiet as the AY210. And the cons, the real price starts at $530, not $399. More of a consideration. The plastic mounting points all round, although they feel high quality, just take extra care with those. The 95mm of pitch travel is fine on its own, but you'll feel it if you're coming from anything more than 140. The magnetos don't spring return, and the flaps lever is a slider instead of a toggle or switch. So the MOZA AY90, it's the cheapest way into force feedback I know of, and it also comes with a great experience. With smooth force feedback, software that's finally grown up, and a build that you would expect for the money. This yoke is a great buy if you don't mind the shorter pitch throw length, and I rate the AY90 quite high.